Hello, fellow readers, crafters, and witches. Welcome back to Inkwoven Enchantment. Today, we are going to be talking about the books I have read so far in 2025. I have a goal to read 36 books this year, and so far, I've read 27, so I'm well on my way. But I wanted to do a quick video to talk about the ones that I've read and dive into what I liked about them, what I maybe didn't like about them, and if I would recommend them to other people. So my pup here is kind of refusing to get cuddled in, so we'll just do it while she's right here. Because what's better than a little video about reading and witchcraft than a book also including some puppy dogs. So the first book I read this year was actually a series, and it started with A Dawn of Onyx. This book was actually being read as part of a Yarny book club, read and also knit socks with it. I didn't knit the socks, I didn't even get the yarn, but I did pick up the book because it sounded really interesting. It's a romantasy, and I hadn't read very many of those yet this year. Well, at all this year, but I also hadn't read many of them recently. So I picked it up and I loved it so much that I actually quickly read the little extra chapters that are online only. Then I dove in head first to A Promise of Prideaux, which is book 2. And then I read the extra chapter for that. And then finally, I read A Reign of Rose as book 3, and then the additional chapter after that. For the sake of my count this year, I'm counting each of those as different books because I had to go to different mediums to find them. So that's 6 total books so far in the year. Now, this series ranged in rating and score for me. I really liked it. Everything was above 4 stars, but some books were better than others. A Dawn of Onyx was so slow, so I didn't really love that, but I knew that it was supposed to get better over time. So I stuck with it, and sure enough, it did get better over time. As I progressed through the series, the relationship got stronger, and the story just continued to get better and better and better. I will say that my favorite part or my favorite book of the whole series is actually the extra chapter from A Dawn of Onyx, where it's a wine cellar scene, and the anticipation in this scene is top-notch. I just loved it. It has stuck with me more than any of the rest of the series, and so if I were you, I would definitely check this out, and if you do get through the first book, definitely go to Katie Roberts' website and read the extra chapter because it's so very, very worth it. So the next book I read, let me check and make sure it's this one. I wasn't ready apparently, even though I've been ready for this video for a long time. Okay, I'm going to my Storygraph profile to pull this up because that is where I've been logging every single thing I have read this year. So if I scroll back to the beginning of the year, okay, perfect. The next book I read is Thornhenge by T. Kingfisher. This book is like a alternative telling of classic fairy tales, but not in the way you would think. In fact, the back says, there's a princess trapped in a tower. This isn't her story. I think that so perfectly emphasizes what this is about. It is not about the princess. It's not about the fairy tale. It's about all of the other characters that have to interact in that space and what they kind of go through. I really liked this. It was a very short read. It took me a few hours, and it was the perfect palate cleanser between all of the romantasy books and what I started reading next. So I definitely recommend it. It was super short and super fun. If you can find it at your local library, that should probably be the way you do it. I kind of wish that this was a library book, but I'll probably loan it to a friend at some point and make it part of my little library. So would recommend it. I rated this, I think, 4 stars. Yep, 4 stars. And it was definitely good. It was definitely worth it. So check it out if you're interested in a fairy tale retelling, but not about the fairy tale, about everyone else. Oh, the next book that I finished reading in 2025. I started in 2024, but it was so good. This book Anyway, so I read Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. It's a gigantic one. It's the final book in the Sanderson-Cosmere storyline of the Stormlight Archive. The next books that are coming out are not part of this archive. They'll be part of something different. We don't totally know what the new set of books will be called, what the next arc will be. But this was such a good finale to the Stormlight Archive in particular, and everything that had been happening on this one particular planet with these gods and everything that's going on. The magic system in the Cosmere is still one of my top 10 favorites of all magic systems. It's probably my top 2. I'm not sure what would beat it right now. So maybe it's the top 1. I love how well it's written. I love the dynamic attributes of the different kinds of magic. It's so good. And honestly, this book was a journey. You go through so much with the different characters through the first 4, and then to come to the 5th book and have everything kind of come together, but in a lot of times ways you're not expecting and ways that you are. It was a really nice and absolutely engaging conclusion to this arc. If you want to check out the Cosmere, which I highly recommend you do, you should start with Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I've actually read this book many times. It's one of my go-to comfort reads whenever I'm feeling down or anxious about something. I just go back and remember Vin's story, and it's just really empowering. So check that out. But also, this was my first 5-star read of the year. I love this book. I love Brandon Sanderson's writing. I really enjoy the arc that he builds into. And I think it's so fascinating to see how an author who is religious and believes in one God, kind of, he's Mormon, can write a book about multiple gods and a universe of a pantheon. And it's just really interesting. I really appreciate it as somebody who's not Christian or Catholic or Mormon, to see other people kind of go beyond what they traditionally believe and write something really fantastic and fantastical. There's definitely stuff in here that I wasn't expecting. There's a little spice scene in this book, but it was really good, and I loved it. So check out the Cosmere if you're interested in a really fantastic fantasy novel. After I finished Wind and Truth, then I needed a total disconnect break. So I checked in with some of my yarny friends and found out that a group of them were reading The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware. Now, this is it's the first book in Low Blacklock's series of books, I guess. And for me, this was a 3-star read. I got through it, but I didn't really enjoy it for a number of reasons. I thought it was so super cool that the main character struggled from anxiety, from panic attacks. She was suffering from PTSD. I really enjoyed that about her character. However, it felt like that was the only thing about her character. And so, as somebody who suffers from anxiety and panic, I know that those things don't define me. They just define those moments. And I really wanted to see more of that from this particular book, and it just didn't get there. The other thing is that it's a mystery. It's not a very interesting mystery. It was pretty easy for me to solve from the start. And so it was fine. I thought it was a good thing to read with a group of people. So I finished that on audiobook, and then I moved on to my next book, A Discovery of Witches. This has been on my bookshelf for a very long time, and I decided it was finally time to pick up the All Souls trilogy and try this fantasy romance book. It is a romance between a witch and a vampire, and the witch isn't really in control of her magic, and she doesn't really want her magic. And the vampire is really old and is kind of stuck in his ways, but he's really attracted to her. So this first book is a lot of anticipation. I give it a 4-star. I enjoyed it. I think other people who like witches and like vampires and like werewolves would enjoy it. The take on some of these characters is really interesting. And from a witch's perspective, some of the witch stuff that they talk about is really good. They just continuously reference things that I'm also referencing instead of my witchy studies. And so that makes me really happy that this author, Deborah Harkness, is at least semi-well researched and is pulling from other witchy texts to help inform the world that she's writing. And I love that. So I really enjoyed this one. I gave it a 4 stars. We'll talk about the rest of the series as we go. After I finished that, let's see, what did I read next? I read The Elements of Spellcrafting by Jason Miller. This was another book club book. I checked in with some witchy friends, found out that they were reading this book, and decided to dive in with them. I sort of enjoyed this book. I think the problem for me is that I did it via audio, and I have learned the hard way that audiobooks for witchcraft are just not for me. So while I think I rated this book, I didn't give it a star rating because I don't give star ratings for things that I'm learning from. So while I enjoyed this book and I finished it, I felt like I learned a few things. I was frantically writing notes like you used to in lecture throughout the whole thing. And I kind of just wish I would have had the book itself so that I could bookmark and highlight my favorite elements and really go forward. However, my one big takeaway from this whole book was actually really, really cool. I got to better understand like how spells actually work in modern witchcraft and not just like the magical witchcraft that you read about online and in fantasy books. So one thing that really stuck with me is once you cast the spell, that's perfect. That's great. But you're not doing enough. You also need to do the mundane aspects of casting the spell. Whether that's, if you cast a spell for fitness, then you should have a plan that you're also following to engage and become more fit. If you're trying to do a spell to sell a house, you should be doing everything in your power to also make that house really appealing, like repainting the walls or finishing the floors or whatever it might be. So it was really, really interesting to read that and to kind of like have somebody tell me what I already felt was kind of common sense. However, just putting it in that perspective of you do the magical and then you do the mundane, it's just introduced that into my daily vernacular, and I really appreciate that. So definitely there was lots of other good stuff in this book, and I think as I get more practiced as a witch and I want to do more spellcraft, then I'll dive more into it. But for right now, I'm really focusing on grounding, protection, and shadow work, so it's just not come up as much just yet. After I finished The Elements of Spellcrafting, I went on a work trip, and I brought a book on this work trip that I knew I needed to read because one of my friends, Kayla from Little Loopy and The Underground, she has been running this book club, and I just hadn't been reading any of the books that I had gotten from her. It's a book and yarn subscription. You buy them each month. But the book is always paired with yarn that she hand dyes, and it's just beautiful. And most of the books that she had sent out in the early part of the year just were books that I wasn't getting into. They're on my did not finish list, but this one was so good. Gabrielle's Moon by William Boyd. It was really fantastic. I didn't actually like the main character at all, and I didn't like some of the side characters at all. However, I thought the book was so good. It was in it's in London and a bunch of other places, and the comedy is really funny. The mystery is pretty interesting. I gave it a 4 stars. I definitely enjoyed the read. I probably will never read it again. And I'll only recommend it to people who I feel like are really going to enjoy it and enjoy some of the intrigue parts of the book. But I'm definitely so glad and so thankful that I took a chance on it because it opened my eyes to remember that I don't have to read books that are just the standard books on my bookshelves that are really tending towards sci-fi and fantasy. Sometimes I can read something that is a little different. And so I really enjoyed Gabrielle's Moon. It's about a dude who has to essentially become a spy. And it's really good. It's really intense, and I enjoyed it. So that's that. After I finished Gabrielle's Moon, I was in the mood to read a book that had been on my TBR for a very long time, and that would be The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This book is so fantastic that as soon as I finished reading it, I immediately gave it to my husband. So I don't actually have it down here to tell him to read this book. So it is about a person who is at this point in their life where they can decide what kind of life they want to live going forward and what kind of life they would wanted to have lived in the past. And it's kind of about accepting yourself as who you are and kind of just experimenting and seeing what other things you could potentially understand. The Midnight Library itself really reminded me of the library scenes in the Magicians TV show, where you can kind of like look around for a book with your name on it, and like you're not supposed to read that book. The Midnight Library, when I was reading it, like just looked and felt like that library as well. So that was really fun and fantastic to have this other world kind of be pulled from a similar sort of library where these books all tell your potential futures or your potential pasts. So I really enjoyed this. I gave it a 4.25 stars, and I would highly recommend it if you want to read about how to fully accept yourself through a fantasy. Next, I dove in to some more witchcrafty books. I checked out Traditional Wicca, A Seeker's Guide by Thorn Mooney. Now, this was recommended to me from a podcast that I listen to pretty regularly, Seeking Witchcraft, and I really love all of the episodes that I've heard. I loved this book so much that I even started bookmarking. This is kind of my first foray into bookmarking into books and putting in little stickies. It's something new I'm trying this year, and so this is the first one that I did that for, which to me just screams that I learned a lot and that I want to reference this in the future. The really cool thing about this book is that even though it's called Traditional Wicca, A Seeker's Guide, it's not totally about Wicca. It's a lot about witchcraft in general, but some of the tips around finding a coven, they kind of apply to all practices of witchcraft. And so I really enjoyed this. It was really eye-opening, and it made me remember that it's okay if I'm not Wiccan, but I can definitely still use their books and their texts to learn, and it's also okay if I am Wiccan. So I read this at a time when I didn't really know, and it was really, really helpful. So I highly recommend it if you're trying to get into witchcraft and you kind of want to know, like, where do I even start? This is a good where do I even start sort of book. After that, I went back to a top favorite of my entire life. This book has been with me for so long, and I love it so much, and I found out that a friend of mine had actually never read it. So I went back and reread it so that I could give them a fully annotated guide to my favorite passages. And for me, fully annotated just means that I bookmarked every passage that I love, that meant something to me, and that I wanted them to think about and reflect on. So, what was that book, you may be asking? That book was Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. As you can see, I got really into putting in the stickies. This is my personal copy. This is the first copy of this book I ever read. I love it so much, and I don't really want to talk about it too much because you should just read it, but there is a specific passage that I would like to read to you. It's on page 17, so it's not too early into the book, or not too late into the book, but it's my favorite passage in the whole book, and I think it emphasizes why I love Ray Bradbury's storytelling so much. So let's dive in. One drop of rain, Clarice. Another drop, Mildred. A third, the uncle. A fourth, the fire tonight. 1, Clarice. 2, Mildred. 3, uncle. 4, fire. 1, Mildred. 2, Clarice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Clarice, Mildred, uncle, fire, sleeping tablets, men, disposable tissues, coattails, blow, wad, flush, Clarice, Mildred, uncle, fire, tablets, tissue, blow, wad, flush. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, rain. The storm. The uncle laughing. Thunder falling downstairs. The whole world pouring down. The fire gushing up in a volcano, all rushing down around in a spouting roar and rivering stream toward morning.
Good.
I just love this book. Check it out. 5 stars. Would read again. I read it all the time. Read it. After I read that 5-star book, I went back to some Wicca research and I read Scott Cunningham's Wicca, A Guide to Solitary Practice. I, again, bookmarked a couple of things that I thought were really interesting, and my favorite part of this book is that the first half of the book is about Wicca. You learn about all sorts of things. You learn about the different celebrations. You learn about theory. You learn about initiation. You learn about self-dedication. But then in the last half of the book, you actually get a full Standing Stones Book of Shadows. And so I think that's really cool that the first half of the book is like, why magic? How magic? What does it mean to initiate? What does it mean to practice by yourself? And then the second half is just like a whole little Book of Shadows. For those who don't know, a Book of Shadows is a really nice, concise way to put in all the things you know. Some witches use a Book of Shadows as a journal, and oftentimes books of shadows are actually just like the spells you used and the results. But the whole point of this Book of Shadows is to tell you about spells that lots of other people have used and they think work. And so it's cool to have a reference Book of Shadows. So I put a couple of things in here as my personal references, and I really enjoyed this. If you're thinking about practicing solitary as a witch, even if you're not Wicca, highly recommend that you check this out as well. After I read that, I really wanted to dive into another TBR long-standing book. This one was actually a book that I was convinced I was going to donate because I just kept putting off reading it. But I decided one day, it was in my donation pile, and I was like, before I donate it, let me actually read it. So I did. And that is Orange, the Complete Collection, Volume 1. It is a manga. It's actually 3 books in one. And this series, I think, is going to make me cry so hard because just the first 3 books, I was already crying. It is so fantastic. It has got some time travel-y elements, but it's really about helping make sure that one of their friends feels loved and valued and doesn't commit suicide. So I really loved this. It hit heartstrings. The only disappointment that I had is that even though it says it's the complete collection, it's just books 1, 2, and 3. That's a lie. There's actually 8 complete collection books, and so I haven't finished all of this yet. So for that particular reason, I think I only gave this 4 stars. Well, I gave it 4.5 stars because I really just wanted it to be the full collection and I wanted to know the end of the story. But it's really good. It's really moving, and I've already cried. So if you want a book about helping somebody who is dealing with those sorts of thoughts, this was really, really good. Following Orange, I wanted something a little happier because that book made me cry. So I went and I read Digging Up Love as an audiobook. I actually got this as a whole book set from a yarn dyer who gave all sorts of things in this package about this book. So there was yarn themed around digging up bones. There was a bath bomb that I still have that I haven't used yet that's like a dinosaur bone, and a couple of other things. Most of those things I had done and used already, but the really nice thing is that it's all stuff that you would use normally, and so Yarnaceous Fibers provided all of that, and then I just had to provide the book. So I listened to it through my library on Libby, and it was really interesting. The only thing that I struggled with is that about halfway through the book, I put it down to do a bunch of other things in my busy, busy life, and it was so hard to pick back up. So for that reason, I only rated it 3 stars, but I would recommend it. The thing that I did love about it is that I don't read a lot of romance that's not about 2 white characters. So reading a romance that's about 2 non-white characters was really, really wonderful. Not only for that romance element, but also because they have different life experiences. And so kind of getting to understand those was really cool. And the more I think about it, the more I wish I would have rated the book higher, but I was having a hard time finishing it. So 3 stars, still a good rating, still a good book. Definitely check it out. that just wasn't one of my favorites. Then I transitioned, and this was really the year of like going back and forth between reading a new to me book and then a book that's been on my TBR for a while. So the next book on my TBR for at least 2 years is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I finally read this. When I first picked this up and when I first looked at it and read the first few pages, I thought this was going to be like a textbook. And I was really nervous, and so I just dove in and was like, okay, we're going to read it. It might be hard to read. It's not. It's not a textbook. Heather Fawcett does an amazing job of telling you about the different kinds of fairies that Emily Wilde is studying without it feeling like a text. So it's great. It's got a little romance in it, and I really enjoyed it. And so I rated it 4 stars, and I'm really glad I read it. Next, I went to continue the All Souls series. And I read Shadow of Night by Deborah Harkness. I did not like this book. I rated it a 3.5 stars because I really enjoy the main character, but the book itself really bugged me. Hey, Waka. The book itself was really, really tough to read because it's a lot about the witch and the vampire go back in time, and they have to live in a different time, a time when the vampire already previously lived and has those previous sensibilities. And so I really struggled with this book because I just didn't appreciate the way that the vampire treated the witch. It made me really angry. It was really hard to get through, and I'm really not sure I'm going to pick up the next one. After I read that, then I read Flowers on the Moon. This was the next book. This was the June book from Little Luby's Book and Yarn subscription, and it's actually a poetry collection, and I loved it. This was such a amazing next book for me to read. It reminded me that books are brilliant. I gave it 5 stars, and I would love to read you one of my favorite poems just so that you can decide whether or not this is the right book for you. I would recommend reading this in small sittings and not reading it back to front or front to back because it does repeat itself a lot, because really every single poem is about self-empowerment and self-love and letting things go. But this is my favorite one. So, Free Reins. You can bloom whenever you desire to. You can bloom wherever you need to. You are not confined to your environment. You are not handcuffed to your past. You are not obligated to anyone. You are free to bloom, softly, wildly, unapologetically. This is a great book. If you want to read good poetry about self-love, Flowers on the Moon by Billy Chapta is a must-read. Hey, Kitty. Can I come cuddle with you? Yeah. There we go. Echo. As long as I'm fully in break, that's what matters the most. There we go. All right. So I've had to do this in a few takes. I recorded earlier this morning, and I thought I got everything, and then it turns out my camera stopped recording. So we're back. And I'm a little bit more cozy. I've got a blanket. I've got my puppy. So let's dive in to the rest of the video, starting with where I believe we left off, which was another 5-star read for the year, Just Kids by Patti Smith. This book was a recommendation from a good friend of mine who recommended it to me as a book to get to know him better and to better understand why he loves New York so much. I really don't read a lot of biographies, and so this was a really interesting one for me to dive into to understand a different perspective and a different way of life. I so seriously enjoyed it. I am such a big fan now of Patti Smith, and I just really appreciate all of the depth that was in the book and how much about her life she was willing to share. I think that's really beautiful and magical and wonderful. And so that was really awesome. And I'm so glad that that was the book that I had read next. Following Just Kids, I picked up Spoonbenders by Gerald Gregory. This is another book that came from the Little Loopies book and yarn subscription / book club thing. It is a little bit of a fantasy book. It's more magical realism. And the magic in this is that some people really do have psychic powers. And it's kind of about that, but it's also about a family who has to deal with the death of their mother and the different ways that they all deal with that. I enjoyed this book, but I only gave it, I want to say 3 stars. Let's just double check. Mostly because, yeah, I did only give it 3 stars because it just hit me at a time where I was dealing with my own grief and loss, and this was just something that didn't help me process. It kind of hurt some of the process and was really, really tough sometimes, but it was fun, and it is a little bit British, so if you want a British kind of comedy, kind of dealing with death, kind of dealing with psychics and magic, it's definitely a good time. It wasn't the right book for me. After I finished Spoonbenders, I picked up Hecate, Goddess of Witches by Courtney Weber. This book was super interesting and fun because it was really my first foray into reading about this goddess. I had no knowledge really of who she was, but I'd been recommended to read some of her texts and to get to kind of understand this goddess that is often seen as one of the triple moon goddesses. And so I dove in, and honestly, this was really, really fantastic. There's so much to take from this. I, yet again, read this one as an audiobook and just recently was able to purchase the physical copy because there are so many passages in this that I want to highlight. So this is going to be a must reread for me so that I can highlight those things and refer back to them because I feel like there's so much I can learn from this book. I really enjoyed it, and if you want to learn more about Hecate, I recommend it. After that, I finally got around to getting through the rest of Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary. I started this book near the beginning of the year, put it on pause so many times, mostly because the first few pages didn't really catch me, but once I got through those first few pages and really stuck with it, I loved this book. It also was a recommendation from a friend, and unfortunately that is a friend who passed away this year. And so part of me reading it was also a way to try to connect with them and ease some of my grief and discomfort in their loss, and my loss of them, I should say. This book was really good. Another 5-star read for me. I loved the characters. I loved the conversations between the characters. I loved the depth of the science behind the project. I loved how communication worked. Just everything beginning to end. This book was a true treat. There were so many times when I was nerding out about things because it was just so good. I loved this book. 5 stars. Would recommend to anyone who likes science fiction, like even the tiniest bit. This is a must read. After I finished that, I then picked up The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I needed a little bit of a break, and I wanted something kind of fun, and so I looked up references, like book talk books, really common ones, and this came up so many times, as I said in my previous video, that I was really inspired by Haley Pham to read this because I know she raves about this whole series. I finished this one. It was such a quick read. I really enjoyed it, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't something where I think I'm going to read the rest of the series. So I only gave it a 4.5 stars. It hooked me. I read it in a day. It was great, but I think I'm going to stop here. And then finally, wanting to understand more about Hecate or Hecate, I dove into this Liminal Rights book, which I have bookmarked a lot. There was so much that I both learned, but also so much more that I want to research. So this was a really interesting book because it was such a summation of so many other texts. And honestly, my biggest critique of this is that it should have been 500 pages. And each one of these bookmarks should have been like 10 to 20 to 30 more pages about that one thing. And so I'm just continuing to like look into all of the things that I bookmarked and highlighted to better understand them. So this is a good like kicking you off into the space. But there's so much that I feel like it's missing. And so with that is what I've read so far this year. It's the end of August, and we've got 9 more books to read to hit my goal. 27 so far, if you count all of the things that I said I'm counting. And so I'm really looking forward to reading those next books. I don't entirely know what they're going to be because I have so many books on my TBR. I've only read about a little over half of what I have in this room, and so there's just so much that I can dive into, and I am really excited about it. So if you want to know more and stick around for all of that, then go ahead and click that subscribe button. If you like what you saw today and you think, oh, this was fun, give it a like. And otherwise, leave your favorite book that you've read so far this year in the comments, and I would love to read about them. And maybe I'll take a chance on one of those books too. And with that, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye!